Have you ever stood in a room full of people who think they know you, only to realize they've never truly seen you at all? That's how I felt that night at the company gala. My navy dress clinging to me like a second skin under the harsh glow of the chandelier, as Brian introduced me not as his partner or equal, but as the wife who warmed his bed and dinners. The crowd chuckled politely, their laughter echoing off the marble floors like shards of glass, while I kept my gaze low, humiliated, burning inside but silent as always. I'm Danielle Carter, or Mrs. Brian Mitchell as the world knew me then, a woman who'd traded her ambitions for a marriage that promised partnership but delivered invisibility. Brian, my husband of 15 years, stood there with his easy charm and broad shoulders, basking in the spotlight of his corporate success, a success I'd built from the shadows. The underlying tension had been simmering for years, my unspoken contributions to his career, the way he'd reduced me to domestic footnotes while claiming my ideas as his own. But that evening, as the laughter faded, I sensed a shift coming, a crack in the facade that foreshadowed everything about to unravel, drawing me toward a reckoning I hadn't yet imagined. He introduced me at the company gala as just the wife who warmed his bed and dinners. The crowd chuckled. I kept my gaze low, humiliated, burning, but silent. Then the CEO stepped forward, clapping me on the back. "We're thrilled to welcome our new head of global operations," he said. My husband froze. His smirk flickered, then vanished. "She's basically my personal chef and bedwarmer," Brian announced to the corporate crowd. What he didn't know was that the board had already made their decision about me, not him. The words hung in the air like poison as 37 executives turned to look at me. Some smiled politely, others chuckled. Margaret from accounting, the same woman who'd complimented my quarterly analysis last week, actually giggled behind her wine glass. I stood there in my navy dress, the one Brian had chosen because it made me look appropriate for corporate functions, watching faces I'd studied for years. These were people whose emails I'd answered, whose reports I'd ghostwritten, whose strategies I'd crafted during countless late nights while Brian watched television downstairs. "Brian, you're absolutely terrible," laughed Robert from finance, raising his whiskey toward my husband. "Where'd you find such a devoted one?" My wedding ring felt like it was cutting off circulation. The chandelier above cast sharp shadows across the marble floor, and I wanted nothing more than to disappear into one of them. This wasn't the first time Brian had reduced me to domestic functions in public, but something about tonight felt different. "Final. She's also excellent with my laundry," Brian continued, his voice growing bolder with each laugh he earned. "Really knows her way around a washing machine." The CEO, Liam Morrison, stood near the bar watching this performance with an expression I couldn't quite read. Our eyes met briefly across the room, and something passed between us. Understanding, maybe, or recognition. My cheeks burned as another wave of polite laughter rippled through the group. The woman standing next to me, someone from the Tokyo division, leaned closer and whispered, "You're so lucky to have found someone who appreciates the simple things." Lucky? The word tasted bitter in my mouth. "Well, we should all be so fortunate," said another voice. "A woman who knows her place in the world." Her place. My place, apparently, was heating up Brian's dinner and warming his bed. Not analyzing market trends or developing expansion strategies. Not the woman who'd single-handedly saved the Morrison account last quarter, or the one who'd identified the supply chain vulnerabilities that saved the company $2 million. "I think I need some air," I murmured. But nobody heard me. They were too busy enjoying Brian's comedy routine. I slipped away toward the bar, my heels clicking against the marble with each step. The bartender, a young woman with sympathetic eyes, poured champagne without me asking. "Rough evening," she whispered. "You could say that." The champagne tasted flat, watered down like everything else in my life had become. From across the ballroom, I could see Brian still holding court, probably moving on to jokes about my grocery shopping skills or my ability to fold his shirts properly. That's when I felt a presence beside me. "Enjoying the festivities?" Liam's voice was quiet, almost conspiratorial. "It's been enlightening," I replied, choosing my words carefully. He studied my face with the same intensity he brought to board meetings. "I've been meaning to discuss the Peterson proposal with you. The board was particularly impressed with the risk assessment analysis." My heart stopped. The Peterson proposal, the one Brian had presented last month as his own work, the one I'd researched and written during 3 sleepless weeks while he attended golf tournaments with clients. I'm glad it was well received, I managed. Your projection models were remarkably sophisticated. We rarely see that level of strategic insight. Liam's eyes held mine steadily. The board specifically noted the innovation in your market penetration strategies. The noise of the party faded into background static. He knew. Somehow this man knew exactly who had crafted that proposal. There's something else, Liam continued, lowering his voice. We've been discussing organizational restructuring, new leadership positions. The board believes fresh perspective is exactly what we need for our global expansion. He pressed a business card into my palm. Call me Monday morning. We have much to discuss about your future here. Then he walked away, leaving me standing at the bar with trembling hands, a piece of cardstock that felt heavier than platinum. I spent the remainder of the evening watching Brian network and charm potential clients, completely oblivious to the conversation that had just altered the trajectory of everything. He introduced me to 4 more people as his better half, though we both knew which half actually did the thinking. During the taxi ride home, Brian chatted excitedly about his conversations with prospective investors. The alcohol had made him generous, almost affectionate. You looked good tonight, he said, patting my knee condescendingly. Nice to have you there for moral support. Moral support? The phrase echoed in my head as streetlights blurred past the window. Liam's business card was hidden in my purse like contraband, like evidence of a crime I hadn't yet committed. That night, I lay in bed listening to Brian's satisfied snoring. For 15 years, I'd been the ghost author of his success story. I'd researched his presentations, written his proposals, and refined his ideas until they sparkled. I'd made him look brilliant while erasing myself completely. But tonight had crystallized something essential. The humiliation at the gala wasn't just embarrassment. It was revelation. I saw our entire marriage through new eyes. The gradual disappearance of my identity, the systematic dismissal of my contributions, the way I'd allowed myself to become background music in my own life. Liam's words replayed endlessly. Your future here, not Brian's future, not our shared future, mine alone. I slipped quietly from bed and retrieved the business card from my evening bag. In the moonlight filtering through our bedroom curtains, the embossed letters seemed to glow with possibility. Monday morning, I would dial that number. Monday morning, I would stop being Brian's invisible assistant and start reclaiming the woman I'd buried beneath years of silent service. The architect of his career was about to step out from behind the curtain. The gala had shattered something inside me, but it had also awakened something I'd forgotten existed. My own voice, my own ambition, my own undeniable worth. And for the first time in over a decade, I wasn't afraid to claim them. As I drifted back to sleep, visions of boardrooms and strategies danced in my mind, no longer filtered through Brian's lens but shining in their own right. The air felt charged with unspoken promises, and I wondered how long it would take for the world to see me as I truly was. Not as an extension of him, but as the force that had propelled us both forward all along. Monday morning arrived with coffee that tasted like regret. I sat at our kitchen table, Liam's business card hidden beneath a stack of unpaid bills, watching Brian scroll through his phone while eating the breakfast I'd prepared without thinking. Peterson wants to fast-track the Singapore expansion, he said, not looking up. Looks like my proposal really impressed the board. My proposal? The word sat heavy in my throat, unspoken. It hadn't always been this way. 20 years ago, Brian Mitchell had been the kind of man who made elevators feel smaller just by stepping inside. Broad shoulders, easy smile, the confidence that came from never doubting your place in the world. I was 23, working reception at Hartwell Industries, fresh from business school, with dreams bigger than my paycheck. You're wasted behind that desk, he told me at the company holiday party. Someone with your brains should be running departments, not answering phones. Those words had felt like sunlight after years of professors who'd dismissed my questions and supervisors who'd handed me filing instead of opportunities. Brian saw potential where others saw a pretty face and fast typing skills. Let me help you, he'd whispered during our third date, his hand covering mine across a candlelit table. We could be unstoppable together. Marriage came fast. Within 18 months, I was Mrs. Brian Mitchell, trading my cramped studio apartment for his spacious townhouse and my entry-level position for what he called strategic planning from home. Think of it as an investment, Brian had explained when I'd hesitated about leaving Hartwell. You help me establish myself, and then we'll have the resources for you to start your own consultancy. Partnership, not sacrifice. The plan made sense. Brian had energy and charm, but his presentations lacked depth. His analysis was surface level. His strategic thinking limited to quarterly targets. I had the analytical mind, the research skills, the ability to see patterns others missed. Our first collaboration was a market assessment for a potential client. Brian handled the schmoozing while I crafted the actual strategy. When they signed a 6-figure contract, we celebrated with champagne and plans for our future empire. See, Brian had said, pulling me close in our living room. We make a perfect team. Team. The word had meant something different then. The requests started small. Could you take a look at this proposal? Just clean up the language? Then they grew. I need a full competitive analysis by Thursday. Eventually, they became expectations. Brian would arrive home with manila folders full of half-formed ideas, dropping them on my desk like homework assignments. I didn't mind initially seeing my strategies succeed, watching Brian present concepts I developed. It felt like winning by proxy. When he got promoted to senior associate, I felt proud. When clients specifically requested his expertise, I felt accomplished. The Tokyo deal changed everything. Nakamura Industries wanted to expand into North American markets, but their previous consultants had failed spectacularly. Brian came home that Friday night practically vibrating with excitement. This could be it, he'd said, loosening his tie. The account that puts me on the partner track, but their requirements are insane. They want a complete market penetration strategy, risk assessments for 12 different sectors, and financial projections for a 5-year rollout. I spent 3 weeks researching Japanese business culture, analyzing currency fluctuations, and modeling scenarios that accounted for everything from political instability to natural disasters. My dining room table disappeared beneath spreadsheets and industry reports. I worked 18-hour days, surviving on coffee and determination. The night before Brian's presentation, I handed him a leather portfolio containing 60 pages of the most comprehensive strategic analysis I'd ever produced. Charts, graphs, projections, everything color-coded and cross-referenced. This is incredible, he'd said, flipping through pages. You've thought of everything. The next evening, Brian came home with a bottle of Dom Perignon and news that Nakamura had signed exclusively with his firm. His bonus was enough for a down payment on the house we'd been dreaming about. We did it, he'd said, popping the cork. This calls for celebration. But when he took his team to the steakhouse downtown the following weekend, I wasn't invited. When the company newsletter featured an article about his innovative approach to international expansion, my name appeared nowhere. When Nakamura personally thanked Brian for his visionary insights, I was washing dishes in our new kitchen. That's when I started paying attention to the pronouns. My strategy secured the Henderson account, not our strategy. My analysis identified the market gap, not my analysis that he'd requested on a Tuesday and received on Thursday, fully formatted and footnoted. I tried speaking up once. David Chin from Brian's office had stopped by for dinner, and conversation turned to the Nakamura success. I'd said, refilling wine glasses. I should start charging Brian consulting fees for all the research I do. The table went quiet. David laughed nervously. Brian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Later, after David left, Brian cornered me in the kitchen. His voice was calm, controlled, but his eyes held something cold I'd never seen before. Don't ever embarrass me like that again. I was just joking. Were you? Because it sounded like you were trying to take credit for my work. Your work? The words slipped out before I could stop them. My client relationships, my presentations, my reputation. His voice dropped lower. You help with research. That's not the same as closing deals or managing client expectations. Don't confuse support with leadership. I never made that mistake again. Years blended together after that. My skills sharpened while my visibility faded. I became fluent in market analysis, expert in strategic planning, masterful at transforming Brian's vague concepts into profitable realities. But my name never appeared on proposals. My insights never earned recognition. My contributions became background noise in the symphony of Brian's ascending career. The irony was perfect. The more successful I made him, the more invisible I became. Each promotion he earned was built on foundations I'd poured. Each accolade he received was for work I'd produced. Each step up his corporate ladder pushed me further into the shadows. I told myself it was temporary, that once Brian reached partner level, he'd have resources to elevate me too. That our success was shared even if the credit wasn't. But success changes people. Or maybe it just reveals who they always were. By the time Brian made senior partner, I'd become his personal think tank, ghostwriter, and research department all rolled into one. He'd hand me complex challenges, like I was some kind of intellectual vending machine, expecting brilliant solutions to appear on schedule. The worst part wasn't the lack of recognition. It was watching myself disappear piece by piece, year by year, until I'd become exactly what Brian had introduced me as that night. Just the woman who kept his life comfortable and his career trajectory smooth, until Liam's business card reminded me that I'd once been someone else entirely. As I sipped my coffee that Monday, staring at the hidden card, I felt a surge of resolve I hadn't known in years. The memories of those early promises now stung like fresh wounds, but they also fueled a quiet fire. What if I called Liam not just to discuss, but to demand the visibility I'd earned? The thought terrified me. Yet it whispered of freedom, of stepping into a role that was mine by right, not by proxy. The memories didn't stop there. They pulled me deeper, reminding me of the subtle shifts that had turned our promised partnership into my solitary role as Brian's unseen strategist. A transformation that unfolded insidiously over 2 decades. After that initial Nakamura triumph, which I'd poured my soul into only to watch from the sidelines, the pattern repeated with increasing frequency. Each project eroding a bit more of my autonomy. There was the Henderson account, for instance, where Brian had come home one evening with a vague notion about entering the European tech market, his ideas scattered like notes on a napkin. I remember sitting at my makeshift desk in the spare room, the one we designated as our strategy hub in those early optimistic days, piecing together a detailed competitor analysis that included not just financials, but cultural barriers and regulatory hurdles I'd researched until my eyes burned. When he closed that deal, earning his first major bonus, he toasted to our success at dinner. But the next day at the office party, it was all about his negotiation prowess, with no mention of the 40-page dossier I'd compiled. As the years progressed, the devolution became more pronounced, like a slow leak in a foundation you don't notice until the structure tilts. By our 5th anniversary, Brian was handling mid-level management roles, and his requests, no longer phrased as collaborations, came with deadlines that assumed my full availability. One particularly grueling assignment was the supply chain overhaul for the firm's Southeast Asian operations. He dropped the folder on the kitchen table with a casual, "See what you can do with this by Friday," while heading out for a client dinner. I delved into global trade data, identifying vulnerabilities in shipping routes that could have cost the company millions amid geopolitical tensions, incorporating predictive models I'd learned from late-night online courses I took in secret. The strategy saved a key partnership, but when Brian presented it, he ad-libbed his way through the slides, adding flair that masked his lack of depth, and the praise emails that followed were addressed solely to him. I started keeping a private journal then, notating my contributions as a quiet act of self-preservation. Though I never confronted him with it, fear of disrupting our team held me back. The emotional toll mounted quietly, accumulation of small dismissals that chipped away at my confidence. There were nights when I'd lie awake after finishing another masterful report, listening to the clock tick, wondering if this was the investment Brian had promised, or a trap I'd walked into willingly. Around year 10, during a rough patch when the company faced a merger threat, Brian relied on me for a crisis management plan that involved intricate financial forecasting and stakeholder mapping. I worked through holidays, sacrificing family visits to create a document that not only averted disaster, but positioned the firm for growth. His promotion to director followed swiftly, celebrated with a lavish party where he joked about his gut instincts guiding the way. While I smiled from the corner, my hands clasped tightly to hide the tremor of resentment. It was around then that I began noticing how other wives at company events spoke of their own careers, their eyes lighting up with independence, making me question why I'd let mine fade so completely. Even the personal milestones blurred into professional servitude. Our move to the suburbs, funded by his rising salary, my invisible labor, came with a home office for me that felt more like a gilded cage. Another pivotal moment was the Latin American expansion bid, where I analyzed emerging markets with such precision that it outmaneuvered competitors, incorporating demographic shifts and economic forecasts that drew from my untapped MBA knowledge. Brian's acceptance speech at the awards ceremony thanked his mentors and team, but omitted the woman who'd made it possible, leaving me to nod graciously as colleagues patted him on the back. The devolution reached its nadir in subtle gaslighting, like when I'd suggest an idea outright, only for him to dismiss it initially, then present it weeks later as his epiphany. Over time, I internalized the silence, convincing myself that proximity to success was enough, even as my own ambitions withered like forgotten plants in the shade. Yet, sitting there on that Monday morning, the business card's weight pressing against my thoughts, those recollections stirred not just pain, but a clarifying anger. The promises of partnership had been real once, born from genuine admiration, but they'd soured into exploitation, with me as the perpetual ghost in the machine of his career. I realized then that the 2 decades hadn't just devolved my role, they'd honed my skills to a razor's edge, ready for deployment in my own name. With a steadying breath, I slipped the card from beneath the bills and dialed the number, my finger hovering briefly before pressing call. Liam's assistant answered promptly, her voice efficient and welcoming, scheduling a preliminary discussion for later that afternoon. As I hung up, a flutter of anticipation mixed with dread coursed through me. This wasn't just a conversation, it was the first thread unraveling the tapestry of invisibility I'd woven around myself. The meeting with Liam, conducted over a secure video call from my home office to avoid Brian's notice, was brief but illuminating. He elaborated on the board's interest in fresh leadership, hinting at upcoming projects where my expertise could shine independently, and encouraged me to prepare any recent work samples, words that ignited a spark I'd long thought extinguished. We didn't delve into specifics yet, but his assurance that my contributions hadn't gone unnoticed felt like validation pouring over parched ground. Ending the call, I leaned back in my chair, the room's familiar walls suddenly feeling less confining, as if the air itself carried possibilities I'd denied myself for too long. Tuesday morning, Liam's business card was still burning a hole in my purse when Brian burst through the front door with his laptop bag slung over his shoulder and that familiar gleam in his eyes. "Cancel whatever you're doing today," he announced, dropping his briefcase on the kitchen counter. Something big just landed on my desk. I looked up from the financial newspapers I'd been reading, a habit I developed over the years to stay current with market trends. "What kind of big?" "Global expansion initiative. The board wants a comprehensive proposal for international market penetration." Brian loosened his tie, already settling into strategy mode. "This could be the project that fast-tracks me to executive level." My coffee cup paused halfway to my lips. International expansion. Exactly the kind of complex, multi-layered challenge I'd been hoping to tackle for years. The kind of project that required deep market analysis, cultural understanding, and strategic foresight. "Timeline?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. 3 weeks. But here's the thing. They want something revolutionary. Not just expansion plans, but a complete reimagining of how we approach global markets. Brian pulled out a manila folder and set it on the table. "I need you to work your magic on this one." Inside the folder was a single sheet of paper with bullet points, so basic they read like a first-year business student's brainstorm. Expand to Asia, increase market share, maximize profits. Nothing about cultural adaptation, regulatory challenges, or competitive landscape analysis. "This is your starting point?" I asked. "Just the framework. You know how to flesh these things out." Brian was already heading toward the shower. "Make it sing, okay?" This one matters. As his footsteps echoed upstairs, I stared at that pathetic outline. After 20 years of building his career from the shadows, he still handed me blank canvases and expected masterpieces. But this time felt different. Liam's words from the gala echoed in my mind. We should talk about your real future. Maybe it was time to paint something for myself. Reflecting on those devolved years as I flipped through the folder, I recalled one more instance that mirrored this exact dynamic. The African telecom venture 5 years ago, where I'd turned a similar skeletal brief into a robust plan accounting for infrastructure gaps and political risks, only for Brian to claim the innovation as his visionary leap. The pattern was clear. But now, with Liam's encouragement fresh, I saw an opportunity to break it. I stared at the flimsy outline Brian had tossed onto the kitchen table, its sparse bullet points mocking my years of unseen labor. But this time, the spark from Liam's words fueled a rebellion I hadn't dared before. For 2 weeks, I transformed that amateur sketch into something extraordinary, not just for Brian, but for myself. The dining room became my war room, charts sprawling across every surface, showing demographic trends, economic projections, and competitive positioning. I interviewed suppliers across 3 time zones, analyzed obscure trade agreements, and identified market opportunities that traditional firms consistently missed. But this time, I did something different. I created 2 versions of the proposal. The first was what Brian expected. A polished, professional document with his name in the header, filled with buzzword-heavy summaries and surface-level insights that would look impressive in PowerPoint but crumble under scrutiny. The second was mine. Real analysis, genuine innovation, strategies that could revolutionize how the company approached global markets, including cultural adaptation protocols, partnership frameworks with local distributors, and financial models prioritizing long-term relationships over short-term profits. The difference was stark. Brian's version read like a corporate cliché, a Wikipedia summary dressed up in jargon. Mine was a blueprint for an empire, weaving together cultural insights from late-night research into Asian consumer behaviors and risk mitigation strategies for currency fluctuations and political instability. I'd spent nights poring over data, my laptop's glow the only light in the house while Brian slept, oblivious to the audacity brewing under his roof. The decision to submit my proposal wasn't impulsive. It was born from the weight of Liam's business card, still tucked in my purse, and the memory of every uncredited triumph I'd handed him over the years. I recalled a similar moment 5 years ago, crafting a logistics strategy for a Middle Eastern client, only for Brian to present it as his breakthrough, while I refilled coffee cups at a team meeting. This time, I wouldn't let my work vanish into his narrative. Friday afternoon, I logged into the company's internal submission portal, a system I'd navigated countless times for Brian, but never under my own credentials. My hands shook as I uploaded my proposal under my employee profile, quietly updated by HR to reflect my MBA and strategic planning certifications. The act felt like treason, not against Brian, but against the version of myself that had stayed silent too long. I hesitated, cursor hovering over the submit button, my pulse loud in my ears. What if they dismissed it? What if Brian found out before the board's decision? But the memory of the gala, his smug laughter, the crowd's complicity, pushed my finger down. The confirmation email pinged, a quiet chime that felt like a gunshot in my chest. Brian spent that weekend polishing his presentation, confident I'd delivered my usual ghost-written masterpiece. He practiced in front of our bedroom mirror, adjusting his tie, perfecting his smile. This proposal is going to change everything, he told his reflection. The board's going to be blown away. I sat on the bed, watching him rehearse talking points for strategies he hadn't developed, insights he hadn't discovered. The irony was so sharp it almost made me laugh. Sunday evening, he finally asked to review the final proposal. Just email it to me, he said, not looking up from his phone. I trust you got everything right. I sent him the basic version, the one filled with generic recommendations and recycled wisdom. He skimmed it for 10 minutes before closing his laptop. Perfect, he said. This is exactly what they want to hear. But I knew better. My proposal, uploaded under my name, carried the weight of 20 years of suppressed brilliance. Every late night, every unacknowledged report, every idea stolen. It wasn't just a document, it was my declaration of independence, a refusal to let another piece of my mind be claimed by someone else's voice. Monday loomed like a horizon I'd never seen before, bright with possibility but shadowed by the risk of exposure. I hadn't told Brian about my submission, and the secrecy felt like a fragile shield. What would he do when he learned the truth? Would he fight, deflect, or crumble? I didn't know yet, but the thought of his reaction no longer paralyzed me. Instead, it fueled a quiet resolve to step into the light I'd been denied. That night, as Brian slept, I slipped into the spare room, my old office, where countless proposals had been born in darkness. I opened my laptop and reviewed my submission one last time, its pages dense with strategies that could reshape the company's future. The data was meticulous. Cultural integration models based on 6 months of consumer trend analysis, partnership frameworks that leveraged local expertise, financial projections that balanced risk with ambition. I'd even included a section on ethical sourcing, a topic Brian had never considered, but which I knew aligned with the board's growing focus on sustainability. Closing the file, I felt a surge of pride, not just in the work but in the courage it took to claim it. For the first time, I wasn't writing for Brian's glory or our shared dream. I was writing for me. Monday morning, Brian left early for a breakfast meeting, kissing my forehead and promising to celebrate his inevitable success that evening. I waited, nerves twisting, until my phone rang at 10. "Miss Carter, this is Liam Morrison's office. He'd like to see you this afternoon. 2:00. The call was brief, but the formality of it, Miss Carter, not Mrs. Mitchell, felt like a nod to the identity I was reclaiming. As I prepared for the meeting, choosing a tailored blazer over the usual gala-approved attire, I realized this was more than a career move. It was a reclamation of the woman I'd been before I let Brian's ambitions eclipse my own. A woman who'd once dreamed of running departments, not just supporting them from the shadows. The boardroom smelled like leather and ambition, a stark contrast to the sterile kitchen where I'd spent the morning bracing for this moment. My heart hammering as I stepped into Liam Morrison's office with the weight of 20 years of silence behind me. I turned the lock as he instructed, the click sounding louder than it should, like a door closing on the past. "This proposal," he began, holding up my document, "is remarkable. The cultural integration strategies alone are worth implementing immediately." Heat flooded my cheeks, a mix of pride and disbelief. "Thank you," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "The question is, was this your work?" The moment stretched like a tightrope I had to cross or burn. "Yes," I said, every word. Liam leaned back, studying me with the intensity he brought to merger negotiations. The board reviewed 2 proposals for this initiative. One was sophisticated, innovative, genuinely transformative. The other was, he paused diplomatically, disappointing. My breath caught. 2 proposals. Your husband submitted something this morning that read like a first draft. Buzzwords and platitudes. No substance. Liam's smile was almost paternal. But this is the work of someone who understands global markets at a fundamental level. He stood and walked to the window, the city skyline sprawling beyond. "We're not just looking for an expansion strategy, Miss Carter. We're looking for the right person to lead that expansion." The words hung like a challenge. The board has been discussing organizational restructuring. We need someone in Tokyo to oversee our Asian operations. Someone with fresh perspective and proven analytical skills. He turned back to me. Someone who actually wrote the proposal we're about to approve. My hands trembled. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we'd like to offer you the position of head of global operations. Effective immediately." The room tilted slightly. Head of global operations, the title Brian had chased for 3 years. "There's a formal announcement being prepared," Liam continued, "but I wanted to speak with you first privately." Outside his window, the city pulsed with life, and somewhere in those buildings, Brian was likely having lunch, confident about his board presentation. "When would you need an answer?" I asked. "Take the weekend," Liam said. "But Miss Carter, the board meets Monday morning. If you say yes, your first responsibility will be presenting this proposal yourself." I walked out carrying a secret heavier than gravity, my mind racing with the implications. For the first time in 2 decades, someone wanted to hear my voice, not hide it. That evening, I sat in our living room watching Brian practice his presentation, oblivious to the seismic shift beneath him. He gestured confidently, reciting talking points from the shallow document I'd sent him, his tie swinging like a pendulum. Monday morning arrived with crystalline silence, the kind that precedes earthquakes. I was making breakfast when Brian's phone buzzed with the company-wide email. He glanced at it absently while buttering his toast, then froze mid-spread. "What the hell is this?" His voice carried a tremor I'd never heard. The butter knife clattered against his plate as he stared at his screen, reading and rereading. "It says you've been appointed head of global operations." The kitchen went still, even the refrigerator's hum seeming to pause. "Yes," I said, sipping my coffee. "I accepted the position Friday afternoon." The silence was so complete I could hear the neighbor's dog barking 3 houses away. Brian's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, then something like panic. He laughed, a sharp sound with no humor. "That's impossible. There must be some mistake." He was already dialing his phone. "I'll call Liam and get this sorted out." "Brian," my voice was calmer than I felt. "There's no mistake," but he wasn't listening, pacing the kitchen, phone pressed to his ear. "Liam, it's Brian. We need to talk about this email." "What? No, I'm talking about the announcement." "Yes, I understand she's qualified," but his confident tone faltered as Liam's words sank in. "But I submitted the proposal." "What do you mean there were 2 versions? The metadata shows what?" His face went pale, the phone trembling in his grip. "I need to come in," he said finally. "We need to discuss this face to face." He hung up and stared at me like I'd grown a second head. "You submitted your own proposal," he said, "not a question." "Yes, while working on mine. While working on the version you thought you were submitting." I set down my coffee cup. "The version with your name on strategies you never developed." For the first time in our marriage, Brian had no immediate response. He opened his mouth, closed it, then sat heavily in his chair. "How long?" he asked quietly. "How long what? How long have you been planning this?" The question revealed his fundamental misunderstanding. He thought this was revenge, a scheme to undermine him, not a woman stepping into her own light. "I wasn't planning anything, Brian. I was just tired of being invisible." An hour later, he left for the office with grim determination, like a man preparing for battle. I knew he'd demand meetings, question the decision-making process, maybe claim my proposal derived from his work. But the truth was in the metadata, the timestamps, the originality of my ideas. As I cleaned the house that morning, folding his shirts with methodical precision, I wondered how many times I'd done this while crafting strategies that built his career. My phone rang at 11:30. Margaret from accounting, her voice bright with excitement. "Danielle, I just heard the news. Head of Global Operations. That's incredible. Thank you, Margaret. You know, I always suspected you were the brains behind Brian's success. The way you'd quietly correct details during company functions or know more about his projects than he did." She paused. "I'm so glad you're finally getting the recognition you deserve." 3 more calls followed, colleagues congratulating me, some admitting they'd suspected my involvement in Brian's work for years. My invisibility hadn't been as complete as I'd thought. Brian came home at 4:30, 2 hours early, his face gray, tie loosened like a half-removed noose. "Well?" I asked. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at his hands. They showed me the submission timestamps. "Your proposal was uploaded at 10:30 Friday morning. Mine went in at 8:15 Monday. They ran both through plagiarism software. Yours was entirely original." He swallowed hard. "Mine contained paragraphs from old consulting white papers, strategies you'd used before." The irony was exquisite. While I'd created something new, Brian had recycled my past work without realizing it. "The board had been watching our department for months," he continued, voice barely a whisper. "They noticed inconsistencies between my presentations and written submissions." "What happens now?" "I've been reassigned to regional account management, reporting to David Chin. David, his junior associate 3 years ago. Not fired, the company was too diplomatic, but demoted elegantly." "The Tokyo project?" I asked. "Yours now, along with the team I've been managing for 5 years." He rubbed his forehead. "Sarah Martinez will be your direct report. She used to work under me." Sarah, the brilliant analyst he'd overlooked despite her exceptional work. Another woman whose contributions he'd undervalued. "I'm sorry this is difficult for you," I said, meaning it. Despite everything, I didn't want Brian to suffer. I just wanted him to understand. Are you? He asked. Sorry, the question hung like a bridge we both had to decide whether to cross. I'm sorry you're hurting, I said carefully. But I'm not sorry, I finally spoke up. That evening, we ate dinner in silence, the clink of forks louder than any words. Brian picked at his food while I reviewed transition documents Liam had sent, organizational charts, budgets, team assignments. The infrastructure I'd supported for years was now mine to lead. For the first time, I felt the weight of my own name, not his, anchoring me to a future I'd only dared imagine. I walked into the 32nd floor of Hartwell Industries, the elevator ride feeling different now that I wasn't just visiting someone else's office, but stepping into my own as head of global operations. The key card in my hand opened doors instead of leaving me waiting in lobbies. My nameplate, Danielle Carter, head of global operations, gleamed on the corner office door like a small miracle, its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the financial district. Inside, the mahogany desk and leather chairs felt both too big and perfectly fitted, a space that was mine by right. Jennifer Walsh, my executive assistant, appeared with a tablet clutched to her chest, her nervous energy palpable. The team is eager to meet you, she said, setting down a leather portfolio. I've scheduled introductory meetings starting at 9:30. My team, people who would report to me, seek my guidance, implement my strategies. The concept was dizzying, a far cry from the spare bedroom where I'd toiled in obscurity. My first meeting was with Sarah Martinez, the analyst Brian had consistently overlooked despite her exceptional work. She knocked tentatively, stepping inside with the careful posture of someone used to being dismissed. Sarah, please sit, I said, gesturing to the chair across my desk. I've reviewed your portfolio. Your market analysis for the European expansion was remarkable. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. You read my reports? Everyone. Your insights on consumer behavior patterns were exactly what the board needed. I leaned forward. I want to discuss promoting you to senior strategic analyst. For a moment, Sarah looked like she might cry. Mr. Mitchell always said my work was too theoretical, not practical enough for executive review. Mr. Mitchell was wrong, I said, the words feeling powerful, definitive. Your theoretical framework is precisely what transforms good strategies into exceptional ones. Over the next 2 hours, I met 6 more team members, each revealing a pattern of brilliance constrained by Brian's limited vision. Marcus Chin, a junior analyst, had proposed cryptocurrency integration for international markets, ideas Brian shelved as too risky. Linda Torres's demographic research had identified untapped South American markets, dismissed by Brian as outside scope. By lunch, I understood why his department had stagnated despite its talent. He'd been sitting on a gold mine, too threatened to let it shine. There's going to be some restructuring, I announced during our first team meeting. I want fresh perspectives on everything. Question our assumptions, challenge our methodologies, bring me ideas that make me uncomfortable. The room buzzed with energy, minds finally given permission to engage. After the meeting, Sarah lingered. Miss Carter, can I ask something personal? Of course. How did you go from being invisible to this? She gestured around the office. The question hit deep. I stopped waiting for permission, I said. I stopped believing my value depended on someone else's acknowledgement. That afternoon, Liam stopped by with international contracts and a smile. Early feedback from Tokyo is exceptional, he said, settling into a conference chair. They're impressed with your cultural sensitivity protocols. Nakamura Industries wants to fast-track the partnership discussion. Nakamura, the company I'd strategized for years ago, only to watch Brian take credit. There's something else, Liam continued. We're launching a mentorship program for emerging female leaders. The board wants you to spearhead it. What would that involve? Identifying talented women who might be underutilized, providing guidance, advocacy, strategic development. His expression grew serious. Women in situations like yours. The idea sent electricity through me. How many other brilliant minds were hidden behind administrative titles, overshadowed by men taking credit? That evening, I called Rebecca Foster from the legal department, whose sharp contract analysis I'd noticed. Rebecca, this is Danielle Carter. Would you be interested in discussing your career over coffee? 3 days later, we sat in a downtown cafe as she shared a familiar story. 5 years of writing briefs, her supervising partner claimed, strategies attributed to male colleagues. "I've been thinking about leaving law entirely," she admitted. "What if you didn't have to leave?" I asked. "What if you just stepped forward?" Over weeks, my mentorship grew. Elena Rodriguez from marketing, Amanda Kim from finance, each with stories of erased contributions. The pattern was systemic, I told Liam during our check-in. "We're losing generations of innovation." "What do you recommend?" "Transparency, metadata tracking, individual attribution, performance reviews based on actual work." He nodded. "Draw up a proposal. The board is ready to listen." At home, Brian and I navigated our new reality with careful politeness. He'd stopped asking about my work after I deflected his attempts to collaborate again. "Maybe we could pull our expertise like before," he'd suggested over dinner. "Like when you were the face and I was the uncredited voice?" I'd replied. He looked away, understanding dawning. Now he came home with regional account stories I didn't ask about, while I stayed late reviewing proposals from women whose talents had been buried. The irony wasn't lost on me. Brian had reduced me to domestic functions while building his career on my labor. Now I was helping others escape the same prison he'd built around me. Saturday morning, I stood in what used to be my makeshift office, the spare bedroom where I'd written countless proposals under Brian's name, now lined with boxes of research notes, strategic frameworks, and reports that had never seen proper credit. I wasn't packing them away. I was reclaiming them, each folder a testament to work done in shadows, innovations created while pretending to be an assistant. This wasn't the past I was leaving behind. It was the foundation I was building upon. My nameplate might be new, but the mind behind it had been sharpening for 20 years. The woman who wrote from darkness had finally found her light, and for the first time, I wasn't sharing it with anyone who hadn't earned it. 6 months after taking over global operations, Jennifer knocked on my office door with excitement and nervousness. "Miss Carter, there's a request from the National Women's Leadership Conference. They want you as keynote speaker for their annual summit in Chicago." I looked up from quarterly reports, now with my signature guiding every recommendation. "What's the theme?" "Breaking through corporate glass ceilings." Jennifer handed me a formal invitation on heavy cardstock. They mentioned wanting someone who'd navigated significant career transformation. The invitation felt weighty, like a diploma I'd never thought I'd earn. Speaking publicly meant acknowledging years of silence, systematic erasure, the reconstruction of my identity, a story I'd never voiced aloud. That evening, in my home office, once my secret workshop, now simply mine with my books and certificates, I started writing the speech longhand, drafting as I used to before typing presentations for someone else. The title came as I stared at the city lights, reclaiming your voice when they've taken it away. It took 2 weeks to perfect, not because words were hard, but choosing truths required care. This wasn't revenge, it was recognition for every woman reduced to a supporting role in her own story. The conference at the Palmer House Hotel held a ballroom seating 800. Backstage, I listened to my introduction, watching the audience through a curtain gap. Professional women of all ages, notebooks ready. "Please welcome Danielle Carter, Head of Global Operations at Hartwell Industries." The applause was polite, expectant. They knew my title, not the journey. I began with a question. "How many of you have had your ideas presented by someone else?" Nearly every hand rose, a ripple of shared understanding passing through. For 20 years, I was the ghostwriter of someone else's success. I researched, analyzed, strategized in silence while another took credit. My voice carried clearly, each word deliberate. I shared proposals written in secret, strategies without recognition, the invisibility defining my existence. I didn't name Brian. This was bigger than one man's opportunism. The most insidious part wasn't the lack of credit, I continued. It was convincing myself this was normal, that supporting another's ambition equaled fulfilling my own. The audience was still, as if movement might break the honesty filling the room. I outlined tactics, documenting contributions, submitting work under your name, speaking up even when your voice trembles. But mostly, I spoke of when silence costs more than speaking. You don't need permission for your own mind, I concluded. You don't need validation to claim expertise. The pen was always in your hand. You just forgot you could write with it. The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes. Women approached afterward with mirroring stories. Decades of invisible labor, insights attributed to men. Dr. Patricia Hernandez, a researcher whose studies were published under her department head's name for 15 years, shook my hand with tears. "I submitted my first solo paper last week," she whispered. "Your story gave me courage." Maria Santos, an architect whose designs were credited to senior partners, pressed her card into my palm. "I'm starting my own practice next month." As the evening wound down, Liam approached with his quiet smile. "Powerful speech," he said. The board watched the live stream. "They're interested in expanding your mentorship program company-wide." His expression serious. "They want an audit of attribution practices across departments to root out credit allocation issues." The implications were staggering. A review protecting women like me who'd built careers in shadows. "When do we start?" "Monday morning. You'll work with our chief compliance officer." That night, I called Rebecca Foster, the lawyer I'd mentored who'd considered leaving. "Rebecca, turn on Channel 7. They're running a segment on the conference." From my living room, I watched highlights of my speech air, focusing on workplace attribution, with interviews from attendees deciding to speak up. My phone buzzed. Sarah Martinez texted, "Saw you on the news. You're inspiring a revolution." Amanda Kim, my boss, asked if I'd present my analysis to the executive committee. "Thank you for showing it's possible." The ripples continued. Women demanding attribution, companies facing questions on promotions. Brian never mentioned the speech, though colleagues told him. His conversations at home carried distance. Like speaking to someone he was beginning to recognize. The ripples from the conference speech spread wider than I'd imagined, each story of a woman stepping forward fueling my resolve. But at home, the air between Brian and me remained heavy with unspoken truths. One evening, as I reviewed applications for the expanded mentorship program, dozens of women seeking guidance, their folders a testament to buried brilliance, he appeared in my office doorway. "Can I ask you something?" His voice was quieter than I'd heard in years. "Of course. Do you regret it?" The way things changed. I looked up from the applications, each representing someone ready to claim their expertise. Which part would I regret? Finally being recognized, helping others find their voices, speaking the truth. He was quiet, then asked, "I meant, do you regret us?" The question hung like a fragile bridge. "I regret the version of us that required my invisibility," I said carefully. "But I don't regret becoming who I was meant to be." He nodded, processing a truth that challenged our shared history. The man who'd called me his bed warmer was seeing the woman he'd diminished as the architect of his achievements. The irony was perfect. In keeping me small, he'd missed my growth. At Hartwell, I continued restructuring, promoting talents like Marcus and Linda, whose ideas flourished without Brian's conservative filter. The mentorship program grew, with women like Elena and Amanda presenting their work directly to executives, their confidence a mirror of my own journey. The board's audit began, revealing systemic credit misattribution, leading to policy changes that ensured transparency. Metadata tracking, individual attribution, reviews based on actual work. Brian's demotion settled into routine. He came home with stories of regional accounts, his voice lacking its old swagger. One night, in his study, he stared at his awards, monuments to a career I'd helped build. "What do I do now?" he asked, vulnerable for the first time. "You learn," I said. "You find who you are without someone else's work." He was silent, then murmured, "I never meant it to go this far." "I know," I replied, meaning it. Despite everything, I didn't wish him pain, only understanding. My office became a hub of innovation, buzzing with ideas from a team no longer stifled. Rebecca Foster, now drafting her own legal briefs, called to thank me for showing her she could stay and fight. The conference speech aired again on local news, sparking discussions in corporate circles about women's contributions. I felt the weight of my nameplate, not as a novelty, but as a truth earned through decades of silent labor. The spare bedroom, once my prison of uncredited work, was now a study where I planned mentorship expansions and global strategies, my certificates on the walls a quiet declaration of who I'd always been. The most profound change wasn't the title or the office. It was the voice I'd rediscovered, the one I'd forgotten I owned. Each meeting, each mentored woman, each policy shift felt like reclaiming pieces of myself I'd let slip away. Brian and I existed in a polite detente, no longer partners in the way we dreamed, but I didn't need his validation anymore. I was enough, always had been, and I'd stopped waiting for permission to be myself. The days grew softer as autumn faded, and I found myself pausing at my office window, watching the city's lights blur into a quiet glow, each one a story of someone finding their way. My journey from silence to leadership wasn't just mine. It was a beacon for women like Rebecca, Sarah, and countless others whose brilliance had been buried under others' names. The mentorship program expanded, training sessions filling with eager faces, their questions echoing my own from years ago. At home, Brian's silence softened too, his glances holding less defensiveness, more curiosity, as if he were meeting me anew. I didn't carry anger, only gratitude for the clarity my pain had forged. The spare room, once heavy with unacknowledged work, now held books and plans for future initiatives, its walls no longer closing in but opening outward. Standing there, I felt the weight of my own name settle comfortably. Like a coat I'd always owned, but only now learned to wear. My voice, once a whisper, had become a steady hum, resonating with others ready to speak. And as I closed my laptop each night, the world felt less like a stage I'd been written off, and more like a canvas I was painting with my own hand, stroke by deliberate stroke, into a future I'd always been meant to claim.